We've been talking rookies all offseason, but it really hasn't mattered until now. It's going to matter a ton over the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be giving you our updated Dynasty rookie wide receiver rankings. We're going super deep with this video. For before the NFL draft, I'm going to be taking into consideration projected draft capital as well as potential landing spots. We actually have some interesting sportsbook data we're able to look at there. And we will be updating these, of course, right after the NFL draft as well. So don't worry, but this should be pretty close to our official list. We've known all along Marvin's going to be tier 1. I have him by himself just because I don't really care what the landing spots are. Marvin's going to be my number 1 wide receiver in Dynasty. If you look at this, I know everybody's talked about him for so much, but just to put into context how good of a prospect he is. He had all the pedigree in the world coming out of high school. He goes to Ohio State, where you had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN, and another wide receiver that's going to go round 1 of the 2025 draft. Despite this, he still dominates with market share numbers. 38% dominator rating. That's 4th in this draft class. 32.4% targets per route run. That's number 2 in this draft class, only behind Malachi Corley, who got pretty much everything in screens. We'll talk about him later on. And if you look at just the raw counting stats here, 3.44 yards per route run. Number 1 with his touchdown rate at 20%. So you have all the pedigree. You go to a school with fierce competition, yet you dominate from a market share perspective. You're one of the youngest wide receivers in the class. He'll be 21 years old at draft night, but still his counting stats are absolutely ridiculous. And if you look currently at updated Vegas sportsbooks, he's minus 500 to be the first wide receiver drafted. So pretty much a guarantee that Marvin's going to be the first guy in the NFL draft. And then if you're looking at where he is in terms of his overall pick, he's like minus 400 to go before the 5th selection. So he's pretty much penciled in to be the number 4 pick. I know we've had a lot of rumors maybe saying it's JJ McCarthy. It looks like it is going to be Marvin. Now, our next guy in his own tier, because he's going to be my number 2 wide receiver regardless, will be Malik Nabers. Nabers has a lot of these same things. He's actually younger than Marvin. He's only going to be 20 years old at the time of the NFL draft. And yes, he didn't have the Ohio State level competition. And yes, he doesn't have the same exact pedigree. It's not like his dad was a Hall of Fame level wide receiver, but still ton of pedigree going to high school. Is still a wide receiver that had serious competition. He had to compete against Brian Thomas Jr., a wide receiver that's going to go round 1 in this year's NFL draft. And despite this, number 1 with his PFF grade, 93.1. Number 1 with his yards per team pass attempt at 3.82. Number 1 with his yards per route run, 3.64. And almost 30% of his targets he drew a route, which was 4th in this class. So similar to Marvin, incredibly young, market share numbers absurd, and at the same time, counting stats absurd. Pretty much guaranteed to be the second wide receiver off the board. He's right now minus 290 to be just that. And if you're looking at where his overall line is in terms of where he's going to go in the draft, he's at 5.5. It looks like there's a little more juice on the side of him actually going before then. So right now, NFL, I don't know. NFL odds makers at Las Vegas Sportsbooks are pricing in that Marvin's going at pick 4 overall, Nabers going at pick 5 overall, and obviously those landing spots without trades would be the Cardinals and the Chargers, which is what pretty much everybody's been talking about all offseason. Now let's go and look at Rome, because Rome is in his own tier at 3 for me. I don't care the landing spots. He's going to be ahead of anybody else behind him, and he can't get ahead of Nabers. He can't get ahead of Marvin for me. So that's why we're going to have all these guys in their separate tiers, because in my mind, they're set in stone. I mean, it doesn't matter what the landing spots look like. Rome does not look as good on paper as the other receivers. He's going to be older. He's almost going to be 22 years old at the time of the NFL draft. He'll be 22 by the time the season gets here. The production isn't insane. It's not like he's drawing a target on 30% of his routes. It's not like he is number 1 in this class with yards per route run. But he has valid excuses for this and why we're willing to overlook it. 1, Washington did not play really any type of real season his freshman year due to COVID. So he's more like a true junior because he didn't even have the opportunity to play as a freshman. 2, he played alongside 2 NFL wide receivers that are going to go inside the top 100 in this NFL draft with Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. So the production profile is not as nice on paper, but we can overlook it given the context that we know this wide receiver has. Film grinders absolutely love him. He's penciled in to be the number 3 wide receiver in this draft class, currently minus 350. And if you look at his overall line, he is currently at 8.5, and it looks like there's a little bit of juice for him to go before then. And what's interesting is if you look at the Giants are minus 225 to take a receiver with their first pick. So, I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise at all if you literally see the first 3 picks be quarterbacks, then 4, 5, 6, Marvin, Neighbors, Rome, and I'm going to be ranking them this way no matter what happens in the draft. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to go Brian Thomas Jr. I could see him falling just a bit based off landing spots. We're going to talk about the Bills and Chiefs just 1 second. Brian Thomas Jr., phenomenal athlete, right? I mean, the next guy we're going to have is A.D. Mitchell in the tier below. But the reason I wanted to have Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of A.D. Mitchell, almost regardless of what happens in the draft, is he had arguably more competition at LSU. Yes, A.D. Mitchell had Xavier Worthy. Yes, he had Jatavion Sanders, maybe Jonathan Brooks if you want to throw him in. But Brian Thomas Jr. had Malik Neighbors. He went up against a top 5 projected NFL draft pick. And while the production profile is not great, right? He's at 2.61 yards per route run, which is 15th in this class, right in the middle. It's not nearly as bad as what you have from A.D. Mitchell. If you're looking at A.D. Mitchell, who is also a top athlete at the NFL Combine, a better athlete if you're looking at his RAS score, and that's what's going to get people so damn excited about him. Plus, obviously, people love the film with Mitchell. I am willing to go Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of him because the production on paper, while it's not great, is so much better. A.D. Mitchell is the wide receiver that I honestly kind of hope he ends up going in Dynasty rookie drafts in a range where I don't need to take him. Because if you're looking at this, 1.68 yards per route run in college. If you had 1.68 yards per route run in the NFL, that would be a serious problem and you would be a bum wide receiver. To do it in college is laughably bad. And I understand what you're going to say. You're going to say, come on, Mason. It's all Quinn Ewers. Ewers sucked. I mean, A.D. Mitchell never had a shot. They should have put in a Manning. Manning would have, just absolutely fed him and he would have had a great season. You could make that argument, right? If you wanted to say the counting stats were bad for A.D. Mitchell, I'm completely fine in hearing that based off how bad the offense is. But what you can't get away from is actually 2 things. 1, was A.D. Mitchell hyper productive at any point in Georgia? No, he was not. And 2, more importantly, yes, Quinn Ewers was probably a very bad quarterback, right? I mean, Holcomb Horns, I hate to talk down on any Longhorn. But if you're looking at the market share numbers for A.D. Mitchell, 18.5% of his routes led to a target. This was one of the worst marks in the entire class. So you can make the argument A.D. Mitchell would have been more productive if Quinn Ewers was more accurate, which I'm sure he would have. I'm sure he wanted to posted the worst yards per route run in the entire draft class. But the market share numbers say that he's not even drawing targets here. So I'm going to have him the tier below Brian Thomas Jr. A.D. Mitchell is still a top 5 wide receiver for me in this class because you go over and you look at Vegas sportsbooks right now, both Brian Thomas Jr. and A.D. Mitchell currently have their line set at pick 17.5. Plus, you look at A.D. Mitchell in terms of the probability of being drafted in round 1. He's minus 750. So A.D. Mitchell is a wide receiver that people really like on film, hyper athletic, and guaranteed to go round 1. So you have to give him his flowers based off those 3 boxes. But I mean, there are serious questions when it comes to his production profile on paper. Now, let's go over to our next guy here. This is going to be Xavier Worthy, another wide receiver that we have from our Texas Longhorns. So also did great at the combine, right? I mean, broke the 40-yard dash record, which if you look at all 40-yard dash record breakers, they're never good at wide receiver in the NFL. A big reason is because a lot of times they'll go a little too high in the NFL draft, given the fact that they can bring an element to an NFL offense that ends up impacting the way that defensive coordinators go out there and are forced to call the game. But at the same time, it may not necessarily lead to actual production from that wide receiver. Is a big difference. And I talk about this all the time, right? All the time. And I almost want to say the same thing with A.D. Mitchell. A wide receiver can be a good NFL talent and can positively impact his NFL offense without being good in fantasy. This is, I mean, any of those field stretchers over the past few years. John Ross, Henry Ruggs, the reason they go so high is not because they're whoever's taking them thinks they're going to get 100 receptions, 140 receiving yards. It's no, they're going to take safety attention. We're going to be able to run the ball and we're going to be able to funnel targets underneath. I'm worried that may be the case with Xavier Worthy. If you look at where he's projected to go in the NFL draft, right now he's at pick 28.5 for his line. And what's very interesting is if we look at the end of round 1 and the beginning of round 2 as well, but the end of round 1 is the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. Right now, the Bills are minus 280 to go wide receiver with their first pick. The Chiefs are minus 110 and the Panthers are minus 130. So it looks like, I would say probably 2 out of the 3 of these teams will be taking a wide receiver. Obviously, you want it to be the Bills and Chiefs. Obviously, you'd way rather have Worthy in Kansas City than Carolina. So all these guys that project to go late round 1, I really think you have to be giving serious consideration. Troy Franklin will be the next guy. Franklin, phenomenal production profile. I mean, it breaks out early at Oregon as a wide receiver that has a target on 27% of his routes. That's 6th in the class. 3.32 yards per route run. That's 5th in the class. He's 4th in the class with his PFF grade. He's 10th in the class with his yards per team pass attempt. Only going to be 21 years old at the time of the draft. So I love the production profile for Troy Franklin. Before the combine, I had Franklin ranked both that of Worthy as well as A.D. Mitchell. But I mean, it's hard to ignore the projections of the NFL draft. It's hard to ignore what happened at the combine and what film guys are saying. I mean, because we go and look at this, Franklin looks like he really is not going to be a round 1 pick. His line's 41.5 in terms of where he is going to be going. So it looks like he'll be more so a mid-second. And if you look at his odds to go round 1 here, he's plus 275. So it looks unlikely. So even though I like him on paper a little bit more, I think you have to kind of trust the film guys here and listen to what we're going to get with the Capital. Now we're going to go over and look at Ladd here. I mean, if you're looking at Ladd, this is a wide receiver that currently I want to say is in that same range. He's plus 160 to go round 1 in the NFL draft. I mean, if you're looking at his line currently, he's at 32.5. So he is projected to go right there at the very end of round 1 or the very beginning of round 2. This is either the Panthers, Chiefs, Bills range. I mean, obviously it's not guaranteed that he's going there, but it looks like it's seriously in the range of outcomes. With Ladd, he's much older than Troy Franklin. Production profile, much worse. He only ran 148 routes this final season at Georgia. I mean, he never had a great year at Georgia. Film guys absolutely love him, just like they absolutely love A.D. Mitchell. I am just a little concerned if we're looking at his targets per route, if you're looking at his yards per team pass attempt. Injured this past year, old wide receiver that never really dominated at the college level. But if you're a borderline round 1 pick, and at the same time, you have an option to go to one of the top offenses in the NFL, I think we have to give you respect, and we have to throw you in this tier with guys that are in consideration to go at the back half of round 1 of your Superflex drafts. But of course, if you want to pull up like our Superflex rookie rankings so you can see where the quarterbacks are mixed in, I updated both my Superflex rookie rankings as well as my 1 quarterback rookie rankings on flockfantasy.com. And of course, if you're not already a member, I mean, you can find the link in the description, comment section. Code FLOCK, get you hooked up with 30% off any sub. Plus, yours truly will break down your Dynasty team. Find all my Dynasty rankings, all the Dynasty rankings for pretty much all your favorite creators. Our Dynasty trade calculator, where you can put in your exact league settings. Our Dynasty team analyzer, all the premium content, including all the Dynasty rookie drafts from all your favorite. It's all on flockfantasy.com. But going over to our next guy here. we are going to be looking at Xavier Legette. Now, a wide receiver that has been a hot topic. I'm sure that a lot of people have heard, okay, he lost his parents in high school. Obviously very sad, dealt with injuries at South Carolina. A very sad story and someone that you definitely want to root for coming into the NFL. But historically speaking, I mean, we went through and showed all this data. If you were looking at the video that says double your chances of drafting a league-winning wide receiver, rookie wide receivers, something like that, where we essentially just showed that wide receivers coming in to play their rookie season at 23 years old, historically speaking, they're not anywhere close to what we have with these 21-year-old guys with their expected hit rates. Xavier Legette, I mean, was good this past year at South Carolina. He was 5th in the class with the yards per team pass attempt, 8th in the class with yards per route run. It really comes down to, do you think it is a valid excuse for him to not produce until his 5th year at South Carolina with his story? If you think that his story gives him that valid excuse, then this should be a player that you're excited for. And of course, y'all know I'm all about the data. I'm all about looking at what has happened historically and trying to figure out how that we can apply that and try to come up with a better expected hit rate today. But you do have to be taking into consideration the context of each individual player, which is why you need to look at your context on Legette. I mean, if you're looking at where he's going to end up going in the NFL draft, his pick line's at 44.5 currently. So it looks like unlikely to be a round 1 pick, but likely to be a round 2. Keon Coleman, also someone else that looks like he's likely a round 2 pick. I mean, we've been low on Keon Coleman for a while now, but I mean, it seems more popular to be low on him now that he didn't perform as expected at the NFL draft. What he has going for him, extremely young, right? I mean, he wasn't super productive at Florida State this past year. I mean, if you're looking at the production profile, Johnny Wilson is maybe a little more exciting, but still a big-bodied wide receiver that's going to get decent draft capital, that's only 20 years old. So even if he wasn't super productive this final season at Florida State, you can kind of excuse that away just given the fact that you're viewing him a little more as that project wide receiver. Now, let's go over to the guys that look like they'll probably be like round 3 picks in the draft. Starting off, Roman Wilson. Based off how unique Michigan's offense was, it's very difficult to go out there and critique Wilson's production profile too much. What I will say, he's going to be 23 years old, his rookie season. So same issue that you have with Legette. Production profile is not great if you're looking at a market share perspective. Only 2.15 yards per team pass attempt. This was 19th in the class. 22% of his targets led to a route. This was 19th in the class as well. But film guys like him. He has a PFF grade of 84.5 at 7th in this class. Typically, if I'm looking at wide receivers that are old and not productive from a market share perspective, it's someone that I'm just not that interested in. But to be completely honest with you, I'm not that interested in any of these guys past this point. Like Malachi Corley goes out there. He's number 1 in the class with his targets per route run. But at the same time, I mean, the man's not running real routes, right? I mean, the man's not operating deep downfield. So it's kind of like the Bryan Edwards situation where on paper, if you just look at the production, looks good. But if you look at where the production's coming from, then maybe it's a different story. Jalen Polk, our next guy. I mean, with Polk and the other Washington receiver we'll talk about in a second, Jalen, you can't take too much away from what you're just going to look at with the spreadsheet. This is going to be somewhere where you have to trust the film guys. You have to look at the landing spot. You have to look at the draft capital. The draft capital looks like it'll be there. It looks like he's, I don't want to say guaranteed to be a day 2 pick, but he's pretty damn close to having that guarantee. But the production profile is just not there because he had to play alongside Rome, and at the same time, he had to play alongside Jalen. Des Walker is going to be our next guy. Another super old rookie that wasn't super productive. Second to last in this class with this PFF grade. His yards per route run look decent, but he's not drawing targets very often. Going to be 23 years old his rookie season. Rookie is going to be 23 years old. His rookie season as well. So wide receiver is 23rd in this class with his targets per route run. I mean, I know a lot of people think he's going to be an effective slot wide receiver coming in. I know you got some hype because he was running routes with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but just because he's running routes with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, doesn't mean he's Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. Now, Brendan Rice will be a little bit younger So wide receiver that was 12th in this class with his PFF grade. This was an offense that was just airing the ball out, right? And even with them airing it out, Rice wasn't a wide receiver that was able to do much with it. 1.72 yards per team pass attempt, 24th in this class. Honestly, I kind of want to move Johnny. I'm moving Johnny Wilson up. What am I doing here? Why am I pretending like we're this low on him? We're going to go ahead. We were going to move Johnny Wilson probably up to the top of this tier. Because in the case with Wilson, I have a very, I don't want to say easy time, but I do have a much easier time going through and excusing away any blemishes that you have. PFF grades, not great. Film guys don't love him. He's 22nd in this class with this PFF grade. But he played alongside Keon Coleman. And Keon Coleman looks like he's going to be a round 2 NFL draft pick. So, I mean, we can excuse away the production there just a bit. But despite that, he was 6th in this class in targets per route run. 8th in this class in yards per route run. So, I mean, we said this way back at the beginning of the offseason, especially when underdog drafts just opened up and he wasn't getting drafted and you could take him at the last round of the big board and it looked like it was going to be a very unique pick with nobody taking him. He's a wide receiver that may go day 2. That has the size where you could see him being a big time touchdown threat. I just really don't want to see him fall to day 3. My hesitation in ranking him like ahead of these guys like Ricky is I'm a little less certain about his capital. Now, Jermaine will be our next player. Going to be 23 years old this rookie season. Production profile looks bad. Jalen going to be our next guy. Hey, I'm going to put Jalen ahead of him. I mean, Jermaine should be at the very bottom of this list. Because similar to what we said with a few of these other receivers, you can explain away the lack of production that you had from Jalen, considering the fact that you had to play alongside Rome. You know, play alongside Polk. So it's a little more understandable that you didn't produce to the level that we would want to see. Just with all these guys that are, what tier number is this? Tiers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, tiers 7 and 8 here, like rankings 11 through 19. It's very difficult to distinguish any of these guys and act like any of them stand out or that much better than the rest. I'm pretty damn confident with the top 10. I don't expect to have too many changes there within the tiers themselves. They'll change, but in terms of like jumping tiers, I don't expect like Troy Franklin to jump to tier 3, right? Like that's not happening. I don't expect Keon Coleman to jump up to tier 4. But any of the guys 11 through 19, based off draft capital and landing spot, I mean, we can see a dramatic change in rankings here. I'm not super excited or sold on any of those guys. But I think that's all I got for you. Appreciate you. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like, subscribe, play Dynasty. I'll update these after the draft. And of course, all of them will constantly stay updated on flogfantasy.com, including the overall rankings, both for one quarterback super flex leagues. And not only my rankings will be there, but pretty much everybody you watch on YouTube with Dynasty rookie draft guides, Dynasty trade calculators, Dynasty team analyzers, the whole 9 yards. But code FLOCK, get 30% off. Plus, yours truly with code FLOCK will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. I think that's all I got for you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day and hope we get to see you tomorrow.